England, 1828. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Hartwell Manor, casting golden patterns across the worn floorboards of the servants' corridor. Evelyn Ashford moved quietly through the shadows, her arms laden with freshly laundered linens that needed to be placed in the guest chambers. At 23, she had long grown accustomed to her peculiar position in her aunt's household, neither servant nor family, existing in that uncomfortable space between two worlds where she belonged to neither. Her mother had died when Evelyn was but 3 years old, leaving behind a daughter whose very existence spoke of shame and scandal. Lord Ashford, Evelyn's father, had never acknowledged the union with her mother. A merchant's daughter he had loved in secret, but could never claim publicly. When her mother drew her last breath, weakened by fever and a broken heart, Evelyn became a burden passed to her mother's sister, Lady Margaret Pemberton, who had married into minor nobility and never let anyone forget it. Lady Pemberton had taken Evelyn into Hartwell Manor, not out of familial affection, but out of obligation, and perhaps a twisted sense of superiority. The child served as a constant reminder that the Pemberton family stood above such scandals, that they possessed the moral fortitude to care for the unfortunate offspring of their wayward relations. Yet this charity came with a price. Evelyn was given a small room in the servants' quarters, dressed in simple grey frocks that marked her as somewhere between maid and mistress, and set to work assisting Mrs. Dawson, the head housekeeper, who had become the only mother figure Evelyn had ever truly known. Mrs. Dawson was a woman of considerable years, her hair silver as moonlight and her hands weathered from decades of service. She had taken one look at the frightened 3-year-old child brought to Hartwell Manor 20 years ago and had opened her heart completely. While Lady Pemberton issued cold commands and her daughter Lucinda regarded Evelyn with barely concealed contempt, Mrs. Dawson had taught Evelyn to read by candlelight, had saved bits of ribbon and lace to brighten the girl's plain dresses, had held her when nightmares came. In the vast coldness of Hartwell Manor, Mrs. Dawson's quarters in the West Wing had been the only place where Evelyn felt truly safe. This particular afternoon carried an electric tension through the Manor's halls. The Duke of Ashford, Theodore Hawthorne, the most eligible gentleman in all of England, was expected within the hour. Lady Pemberton had been in a state of barely controlled excitement for weeks, orchestrating every detail of his visit with military precision. The Duke's arrival was not mere social courtesy. He came to discuss matters of significant importance to the aristocratic families of the county, matters that required the cooperation and presence of the local gentry. But Lady Pemberton had grander designs than simple cooperation. Her daughter Lucinda, at 20 years of age, was beautiful in the way that careful breeding and considerable fortune could ensure. Golden-haired and blue-eyed, with a figure that her expensive gowns displayed to perfection, Lucinda had been groomed since childhood for precisely this moment. Lady Pemberton had spent years cultivating connections, dropping careful hints in the right drawing rooms, ensuring that when the Duke of Ashford looked for a bride, Lucinda Pemberton would be foremost in his consideration. Such a match would elevate the Pemberton family to heights Lady Margaret had dreamed of since her own modest marriage to the late Sir Edmund Pemberton. Evelyn had heard the plans discussed endlessly over the past weeks. She had been instructed to remain out of sight during the Duke's visit, to keep to the servants' areas, and certainly not to present herself in any capacity that might draw attention. Lady Pemberton had been quite clear on this point, her thin lips pressed into a hard line as she delivered her orders. There was to be nothing, absolutely nothing, that might distract from Lucinda's opportunity to shine. As Evelyn climbed the servants' stairs toward the guest wing, she heard the commotion below that signaled the Duke's arrival. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel, the calling of footmen, the rustle of skirts as Lady Pemberton and Lucinda positioned themselves in the entrance hall. Evelyn paused on the landing, hidden from view by the heavy velvet curtains that divided the servants' passage from the main corridor. She knew she should not look, should not risk her aunt's wrath, but curiosity overcame caution. She had heard so much about the Duke of Ashford, about his wealth and power, his ancient title and vast estates. Some whispered that he was cold and proud, others that he was intelligent and fair. The young ladies of the county spoke of his handsome features and commanding presence in breathless tones during their afternoon calls. Through a gap in the curtains, Evelyn caught her first glimpse of Theodore Hawthorne. He was tall, his figure elegant in a coat of deep blue superfine that had certainly come from the finest London tailors. His hair was dark, almost black, and brushed back from a face that was indeed handsome, but held something more interesting than mere physical beauty. There was intelligence in those grey eyes, and perhaps a touch of weariness, as though the weight of his position and responsibilities had marked him in ways that his privileged life could not entirely conceal. He moved with the unconscious grace of a man accustomed to command, yet there was no arrogance in his bearing as he greeted Lady Pemberton with proper courtesy. Evelyn watched as Lucinda performed her practiced curtsy, rising with a calculated smile that she had rehearsed before her mirror countless times. The Duke bowed politely, his expression pleasant, but revealing nothing of his thoughts. Lady Pemberton ushered them all toward the drawing-room, her voice bright with false warmth, as she discussed the weather and the conditions of the road from London. Evelyn knew she should move along, should complete her tasks, and disappear before anyone noticed her presence. But something held her there, her fingers gripping the linens in her arms as she watched the distinguished party disappear into the drawing-room. A strange sensation had settled in her chest, something she could not quite name. It was as though the very air in the manor had shifted, as though some invisible thread had been pulled taut, connecting her to the tall figure of the Duke in ways she could not begin to understand. She shook herself free of such fanciful thoughts and hurried along to the guest chambers, where she set about her work with practiced efficiency. The Duke would occupy the finest rooms, of course, with their view over the gardens and their furnishings of polished mahogany and rich fabrics. Evelyn smoothed the linens on the great four-poster bed, arranged fresh flowers in the porcelain vases, ensured that every detail met the exacting standards Lady Pemberton demanded. As she worked, she could hear the distant murmur of voices from below, the occasional bright laugh from Lucinda that carried a note of performance rather than genuine mirth. The afternoon stretched into evening, and Evelyn retreated to the kitchens to help Mrs. Dawson oversee the preparation of dinner. The older woman moved more slowly these days, her joints stiff with age, and Evelyn had gradually taken on more of the physical demands of the housekeeper's role. They worked in comfortable silence, checking the roasted meats and the delicate pastries, tasting the sauces and adjusting the seasonings. The cook and her staff bustled about with the organized chaos that preceded any formal dinner, particularly one meant to impress a guest of the Duke's stature. "You've been quiet today," Mrs. Dawson observed, her shrewd eyes studying Evelyn's face. "More so than usual." Evelyn managed a small smile. "I am well, Mrs. Dawson. Simply ensuring everything is perfect for Lady Pemberton's dinner." The housekeeper made a soft sound that might have been agreement or skepticism. She had long since learned to read the shadows in Evelyn's eyes, the small tells that betrayed her deeper feelings. "His Grace arrived this afternoon, I understand. Did you catch a glimpse of him?" "Only briefly," Evelyn admitted, her hands occupied with arranging delicate sugar flowers on a towering confection. "He seems very dignified." "Dignified," Mrs. Dawson repeated with a hint of amusement. "That's one word for it, I suppose. They say he's a good man for all his rank and fortune, fair to his tenants, generous with his patronage, not given to the excesses that ruin so many young men of wealth." Evelyn nodded, though her thoughts remained strangely unsettled. She had no reason to think further about the Duke of Ashford, no reason to let his presence disturb the careful equilibrium she had established in her constrained life. Yet she could not quite dismiss the memory of that moment on the stairs, the way something had shifted inside her when she saw him. Dinner was announced at 8 o'clock, and the household staff moved with choreographed precision to serve the elaborate meal. Evelyn remained in the background, as was proper, ensuring that Mrs. Dawson had everything she needed to supervise the service. Through the open doors leading to the dining room, she could see the glittering table, the finest china and silver brought out for the occasion, the candles casting a warm glow over Lady Pemberton's triumphant face. The Duke sat at the place of honour, with Lucinda positioned strategically to his right. Lady Pemberton had invited several other local families of consequence, ensuring that the evening had the appearance of a proper social gathering rather than an obvious attempt at matchmaking. Yet everyone present understood the true purpose of the dinner, and speculation buzzed through the room like bees around honeyed flowers. Evelyn caught fragments of conversation, as she moved through the shadows of the corridor, bringing messages from the kitchen or ensuring that the footman had fresh bottles of wine at the ready. The Duke spoke with intelligence and wit, discussing matters of politics and estate management with the gentlemen, turning to lighter topics when addressing the ladies. Lucinda laughed at his remarks with practiced charm, her fan fluttering in a display of coquetry that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. Yet even from her distant vantage point, Evelyn sensed something amiss. The Duke's smiles seemed polite rather than genuine, his attention to Lucinda courteous but lacking any spark of real interest. He participated in the evening's entertainment with perfect propriety, but there was a quality of remove about him, as though part of his mind remained elsewhere. The dinner concluded near midnight, with the guests retiring to the drawing-room for cards and conversation. Lady Pemberton was in high spirits, clearly pleased with how the evening had progressed. She cornered Evelyn in the hallway as the younger woman was carrying a tray of used glasses back to the kitchens. "Everything has gone splendidly," Lady Pemberton announced, her voice sharp with satisfaction. "The Duke was most attentive to Lucinda. I should not be surprised if we receive excellent news within the fortnight." "I am glad the evening pleased you, Aunt," Evelyn said quietly, keeping her eyes downcast. Lady Pemberton's expression hardened slightly. "You will remember what I told you. You are to keep to your duties and remain invisible during His Grace's stay. I will not have anything interfere with Lucinda's prospects. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear, Aunt." "Good. Now take those glasses to the scullery and then retire to your room. I do not wish to see you wandering about." Evelyn nodded and hurried away, her cheeks burning with the familiar sting of humiliation. She had long since learned not to expect kindness from her aunt, but the casual cruelty still had the power to wound. In the kitchens, she found Mrs. Dawson overseeing the cleaning, her lined face weary with exhaustion. "You should rest," Evelyn urged gently, taking the ledger from the older woman's hands. "I shall finish the evening's accounts and ensure everything is properly stored." Mrs. Dawson patted her hand with affection. "You're a good girl, Evelyn. Too good for this house if you want the truth of it." She lowered her voice, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. "Your aunt's ambitions are writ plain across her face tonight. She's counting her chickens before they're hatched, mark my words." "Lucinda is very beautiful," Evelyn observed, though the words tasted oddly bitter on her tongue, "and accomplished. Surely the Duke would be fortunate to win her hand." Mrs. Dawson made that skeptical sound again. "Beauty and accomplishments are well enough, but they don't make a marriage, child. There must be something more, something that speaks heart to heart." She studied Evelyn's face for a long moment, then sighed. "But what would an old woman know? I've never married after all. Go on with you now, and don't stay up too late with those accounts." Evelyn worked quietly in the stillness of the kitchens, her pen scratching across the pages of the household ledger as she recorded the evening's expenses. The sounds of the party had faded as the guests departed and the family retired to their chambers. Only the occasional creak of old timbers and the soft whisper of wind against the windows broke the silence. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not hear the footsteps approaching until a voice startled her from her concentration. "I beg your pardon. I did not mean to disturb you." Evelyn looked up sharply to find the Duke of Ashford standing in the doorway of the kitchens. Her heart lurched violently in her chest, and she rose so quickly that her chair scraped harshly against the stone floor. The ledger slipped from her hands and would have fallen if Theodore had not moved with surprising speed to catch it. "Your Grace," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She dropped into a curtsy, her mind racing with confusion and alarm. What was the Duke doing in the kitchens at this hour? Had she done something wrong? Would her aunt be furious if she discovered that Evelyn had been seen by their distinguished guest? Theodore held the ledger for a moment, his grey eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized, his features carved with aristocratic precision, but softened by something in his expression that she could not quite identify. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible, that somehow made him seem more human, less the distant figure of wealth and power. "I found myself unable to sleep," he said, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. "I thought perhaps a glass of water might help." but I seem to have lost my way in your aunt's rather extensive manor." He smiled slightly, a self-deprecating expression that transformed his entire face. "I confess I'm not usually so poor with directions." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she took the ledger from him, setting it carefully on the table. "The house can be confusing, Your Grace. The original structure has been added to many times over the centuries." She moved to the pump and filled a clean glass with water, acutely conscious of his presence behind her. "Here, my lord." Theodore accepted the glass, but his attention remained fixed on her face rather than the water. "Thank you." "And you are?" "Evelyn, Your Grace. I assist Mrs. Dawson, the housekeeper." "Evelyn," he repeated as though tasting the name. "A lovely name. Are you related to the Ashfords? I noted your surname in the ledger." Heat flooded her cheeks, and she looked away, unable to meet those penetrating grey eyes. "A distant connection, Your Grace. Nothing of consequence." "I see." There was something in his tone that suggested he did indeed see, perhaps more than she wished. "You were working rather late. Does Lady Pemberton often require such dedication from her household staff?" "I do not mind the work, Your Grace. Mrs. Dawson has been very kind to me, and I'm happy to ease her burdens where I can." Theodore moved closer, setting the untouched glass of water on the table beside her ledger. "You did not attend the dinner this evening." It was not a question, but Evelyn felt compelled to answer nonetheless. "I am not. That is, it would not have been appropriate, Your Grace. My position in the household is not that of family. Yet you bear the Ashford name." His voice had dropped to barely more than a murmur, and something in its timbre sent shivers along her spine. "That seems rather more than a distant connection, does it not?" Evelyn's throat tightened with emotions she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge: the old shame, the lingering hurt of rejection, the weariness of existing always on the periphery of life. "My circumstances are complicated, Your Grace. I would not wish to burden you with the details." "What if I told you that I wished to know those details?" Theodore asked quietly. "What if I said that in the few moments since I entered this kitchen, I have found more genuine interest than in the entire evening of orchestrated pleasantries upstairs?" Evelyn's eyes flew to his face, searching for mockery or cruelty, but finding only sincerity and something else that made her heart pound. "Your Grace, Look at me," he said softly, and she found she could not resist the gentle command in his voice. When their eyes met fully for the first time, something profound and irrevocable occurred. It was as though the world narrowed to just the two of them standing in the candle-lit kitchen, as though every moment of both their lives had been leading inexorably to this precise instant. Theodore drew in a sharp breath, his hand lifting unconsciously as though he might reach for her before he caught himself. "Forgive me," he said, his voice rough with an emotion Evelyn could not name. "I should not have intruded upon your evening. I should return to my chambers." But he did not move, and neither did she. They stood frozen in that moment, the air between them crackling with unspoken recognition. Evelyn felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one more step would send her tumbling into unknown territory from which there would be no return. The sound of footsteps on the stairs above broke the spell. Theodore stepped back quickly, his expression shifting into the composed mask he had worn throughout the dinner. "Thank you for the water, Miss Ashford. I trust I can find my way back now." He turned and left the kitchen with swift strides, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the flickering candlelight, her heart racing and her hands shaking. She pressed her palms flat against the table, trying to steady herself, trying to make sense of what had just transpired. Nothing had happened, not really. A brief conversation, a shared glance. Yet everything felt different, as though the very foundations of her world had shifted beneath her feet. She did not know how long she stood there before she finally gathered the strength to extinguish the candles and make her way to her small room in the servants' quarters. Sleep eluded her for hours as she lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and reliving those few moments in the kitchen. The way Theodore had looked at her, the gentleness in his voice, the strange sense of connection that had flowed between them like an electric current. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was reading far too much into a simple encounter. The Duke of Ashford could have no real interest in the bastard niece of Lady Pemberton, the girl who existed only in the shadows of Hartwell Manor. Yet when she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams were filled with grey eyes and a voice that spoke her name like a prayer. The following morning dawned clear and bright, with September sunshine streaming through the windows of Hartwell Manor. Evelyn rose early as always, splashing cold water on her face and dressing in her usual grey frock before making her way to the kitchens. She found Mrs. Dawson already there, overseeing the preparation of breakfast trays for the family and their guest. "You look tired, child," the housekeeper observed with concern. "Did you sleep poorly?" "I am well enough," Evelyn assured her, though the shadows beneath her eyes told a different story. She set about her morning tasks with mechanical efficiency, trying not to think about the Duke, trying not to hope that she might glimpse him again. Lady Pemberton swept into the kitchens mid-morning, her expression radiating satisfaction. "His Grace has expressed a desire to tour the grounds this afternoon. Lucinda will accompany him, of course. Evelyn, you will ensure that the rose garden is perfectly maintained and that refreshments are available in the summer house should they wish to rest there." "Yes, Aunt," Evelyn murmured, keeping her eyes downcast. "And remember what I told you," Lady Pemberton added sharply. "You are to remain out of sight. I will not have you wandering about where you might be seen." The afternoon found Evelyn in the rose garden as instructed, checking that the paths were swept clean and the flower beds immaculate. The roses were in their last full bloom before autumn would claim them, their petals ranging from palest cream to deepest crimson. She had always loved this garden, had spent many solitary hours here finding what peace she could among the fragrant blooms. It seemed cruel that even this small sanctuary was now denied to her, claimed by her aunt's ambitions for Lucinda. She heard their voices before she saw them, Lucinda's bright laugh carrying across the garden. Evelyn quickly retreated behind a tall hedge, positioning herself where she could slip away unseen once they had passed. Through the leaves, she could see Lucinda's golden hair gleaming in the sunlight, her pale blue dress the perfect complement to the garden's beauty. The Duke walked beside her, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression politely attentive as Lucinda chatted about the various plantings and their history. "Mamma has always been most particular about the roses," Lucinda was saying. "She considers them the crowning glory of Hartwell's gardens. Do you not agree, Your Grace, that they are exceptionally fine?" "They are indeed beautiful," Theodore replied, though his tone lacked enthusiasm. His gaze seemed to wander across the garden, almost as though he were searching for something or someone. They drew closer to Evelyn's hiding place, and she pressed herself against the hedge, praying they would move along before she was discovered. But fate had other designs. A thorn caught at her sleeve, and in her attempt to free herself quietly, she stumbled slightly, her foot dislodging a small stone that skittered across the path. Both Lucinda and Theodore turned at the sound. For a frozen moment Evelyn stood exposed, her face flushed with embarrassment, her grey dress drab against the vibrant colours of the garden. Lucinda's expression shifted from surprise to fury in an instant. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp with outrage. "Mother specifically instructed you to remain out of sight." "I was just leaving, Miss Lucinda," Evelyn said quickly, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Please forgive the intrusion." "See that you do," Lucinda snapped. "Really, the presumption is quite astounding. Come, Your Grace, let us continue our walk elsewhere. I apologize for this unseemly interruption." But Theodore was not looking at Lucinda. His gaze was fixed on Evelyn with an intensity that made her breath catch, the same recognition she had seen in the kitchen burning even brighter in the daylight. He seemed to have forgotten Lucinda's existence entirely. His attention focused solely on the young woman in the grey dress, who looked as though she wished the earth would open and swallow her whole. "Miss Ashford," he said, his voice cutting through Lucinda's irritated comments. "We meet again." Lucinda's head snapped toward him, confusion and suspicion warring in her expression. "You know her, Your Grace?" "We encountered each other briefly last evening," Theodore said, his eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. "When I lost my way in the manor's corridors." He took a step closer, ignoring Lucinda's small gasp of surprise. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, are you familiar with the roses in this garden? I confess I have some interest in horticulture and would value the opinion of someone who seems to know these grounds well." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel Lucinda's furious gaze boring into her, could imagine the punishment that would follow this encounter. Yet something in Theodore's expression, some unspoken plea or challenge, made her lift her chin and meet his eyes. "I do know something of the roses, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I have tended them for many years." "Then perhaps you would be so kind as to share that knowledge," Theodore replied, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like triumph. "Miss Pemberton, I hope you will forgive me if I detain Miss Ashford for a few moments. I find myself quite curious about the cultivation methods employed here." Lucinda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She had been taught many skills to attract and hold a gentleman's attention, but she had never been prepared for a situation where a duke of the realm dismissed her in favor of a bastard servant. Her face flushed an unbecoming shade of red, and her voice, when she finally found it, trembled with barely controlled rage. "But, Your Grace, I had hoped we might walk to the lake. The view is quite spectacular this time of day." "Perhaps later," Theodore said smoothly, his tone brooking no argument. "I shall return to the house shortly." It was a clear dismissal, delivered with aristocratic authority that could not be challenged. Lucinda had no choice but to curtsy stiffly and retreat, though the look she cast at Evelyn promised retribution. When she had disappeared around the hedge, Theodore turned back to Evelyn with an expression that combined relief and something darker, more intense. "Now," he said softly, "perhaps you will tell me the truth about your position in this household. And do not dissemble, Miss Ashford. I have some experience in reading people, and I know when I am being told carefully edited versions of the truth." Evelyn's hands twisted together, her instinct for self-preservation warring with an inexplicable desire to be honest with this man who looked at her as though she mattered. "It is not a pleasant story, Your Grace." "I suspect as much. Tell me anyway." And so, standing in the rose garden with the September sun warm on her face and the Duke of Ashford's steady gaze upon her, Evelyn told the story she had never shared with anyone outside Mrs. Dawson. She spoke of her mother's death, her father's refusal to acknowledge her existence, her aunt's cold charity that came with the price of invisibility. The words tumbled out in a rush, as though a dam had broken inside her, and with them came tears she had not permitted herself to shed in years. Theodore listened in silence, his expression growing progressively darker as the tale unfolded. When she finally fell quiet, her voice hoarse and her cheeks wet with tears, he stepped closer still, pulling a pristine handkerchief from his pocket and offering it to her with such gentleness that it broke something in her chest. "Your aunt is a fool," he said flatly, "and cruel besides. That she could have you in her house all these years and fail to see your worth speaks to a poverty of spirit I find contemptible." Evelyn accepted the handkerchief with trembling hands, dabbing at her eyes. "You are kind to say so, Your Grace, but—" "I am not being kind," Theodore interrupted. "I am being truthful. From the moment I saw you last night in the kitchen, from the first instant our eyes met, I knew that I had found something precious beyond measure. I do not expect you to understand this, Miss Ashford, or perhaps even to believe it. I barely understand it myself, but I know with absolute certainty that I cannot leave this house without ensuring that you are protected, that you are given the respect and care you deserve." Evelyn stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "Your Grace, you cannot mean— that is, we have barely spoken. You do not know me." "Then I shall endeavor to remedy that situation," Theodore replied, a smile touching his lips that transformed his entire countenance. "With your permission, of course, I would very much like to know you, Evelyn Ashford. I would like to know everything about you, your thoughts, your dreams, what makes you smile and what causes you sorrow. I realize this is highly irregular, and I am violating every rule of proper courtship, but I find I do not care about conventions when faced with something that feels this profoundly right." "But Lucinda," Evelyn whispered, "my aunt's expectations—" "Are of no consequence to me," Theodore said firmly. "I will not be maneuvered into a marriage, no matter how carefully your aunt has laid her plans. I am master of my own fate, Miss Ashford, and I choose to pursue a connection that speaks to my heart rather than one that serves social ambition." He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished, and took her hand in his. The touch sent fire racing through her veins, and she gasped at the intensity of her reaction. "Your Grace," she began, but he shook his head. "Theodore," he said quietly, "when we are alone, I would very much like to hear you say my name." "I cannot," Evelyn protested weakly, though her fingers curled around his of their own volition. "It would not be proper." "Then we shall have to make it proper," Theodore replied. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, and his grey eyes held hers with an intensity that made rational thought nearly impossible. "I am going to court you, Evelyn Ashford. With your permission, I am going to call upon you, to speak with you, to learn everything there is to know about the remarkable woman I discovered in a midnight kitchen. And at the end of that courtship, if you will have me, I am going to make you my Duchess." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Evelyn heard the words but could not quite believe them, could not reconcile this declaration with everything she had ever known about her place in the world. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. "I am nobody, nothing. I have no fortune, no connections, no family of any worth. Your position, your responsibilities. My responsibilities include ensuring my own happiness and that of my future family," Theodore said. "And I have learned, Miss Ashford, that happiness cannot be found in marriages of convenience or political alliance. It comes from connection, from understanding, from the meeting of two souls who recognize each other across whatever distance or obstacles society might place between them." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers racing up her arm. "I saw that recognition in your eyes last night, just as you saw it in mine. Tell me I am wrong. Tell me you felt nothing, and I will leave this place and never trouble you again." But Evelyn could not tell him that, because it would be a lie. She had felt it, that profound sense of rightness, as though all the scattered pieces of her life had suddenly aligned. She had tried to dismiss it as fantasy, as the dangerous dreaming of a girl who had learned long ago not to hope for more than survival. Yet here stood Theodore Hawthorne, Duke of Ashford, declaring his intentions with a conviction that made her believe for the first time that perhaps her life could hold more than shadows and service. "I felt it," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But I am afraid, Your Grace. Theodore, I am afraid of hoping, afraid of what will happen when my aunt discovers your interest, afraid of all the ways this could end in heartbreak." "Then we shall face those fears together," Theodore said simply. "But I will not let them rob us of what might be. Trust me, Evelyn. Trust that what we feel is real and worth fighting for." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Theodore released her hand with obvious reluctance, stepping back to a more appropriate distance. Mrs. Dawson appeared around the hedge, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes darted between them with sharp intelligence. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but Lady Pemberton has sent me to inquire if you would care for refreshments in the summer house. Miss Lucinda is waiting there." "Thank you, Mrs. Dawson," Theodore replied smoothly. "Please inform Lady Pemberton that I shall join her shortly. I was just admiring the roses with Miss Ashford here. She has been most informative about their care." Mrs. Dawson's eyebrows rose fractionally, but she merely curtsied and withdrew. Theodore turned back to Evelyn, lowering his voice to a murmur that only she could hear. "I must go and perform my social obligations, tedious though they may be, but I shall find a way to speak with you again before I depart Hartwell. This conversation is far from over, Evelyn. In fact, I rather think it has only just begun." He bowed elegantly and strode away, leaving Evelyn standing amid the roses with her thoughts in complete disarray. She pressed her hands to her burning cheeks, trying to steady her breathing, trying to convince herself that what had just transpired was real and not some elaborate dream from which she would soon awaken. Mrs. Dawson returned a few moments later, her lined face creased with concern. "Child, what have you done? Lady Pemberton is in a towering rage." Miss Lucinda returned to the house in tears, claiming that His Grace dismissed her in favor of speaking with you. "I did nothing, Mrs. Dawson, I swear it," Evelyn said quickly. "I was trying to stay out of sight as instructed, but the Duke saw me and insisted on conversation. I could not refuse him without being impolite." The housekeeper studied her face for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by fear. "Oh, Evelyn, Tell me you have not lost your heart to him. Tell me you are not entertaining foolish hopes." "I do not know what to tell you," Evelyn admitted, her voice breaking. "I know it is foolish, I know it is impossible, but Mrs. Dawson, when he looks at me, I feel as though I matter, as though I am not just the bastard niece, the burden, the shadow in the corner. He sees me, truly sees me, and he does not look away in disgust or dismissal." Mrs. Dawson's expression softened with compassion and sorrow. She pulled Evelyn into an embrace, holding her as she had when Evelyn was a frightened child newly arrived at Hartwell Manor. "I know, child. I know how powerful such feelings can be. But you must be careful. Men of his station do not marry girls like us, no matter how sincere their words may seem in the moment. And your aunt, oh Evelyn, your aunt will make your life a misery if she suspects the Duke's attention has been diverted from Lucinda to you." "I know," Evelyn whispered against the older woman's shoulder. "I know all of this. But Mrs. Dawson, what if he truly means what he says? What if this is real?" "Then God help you both," Mrs. Dawson murmured, "for the storm that is coming will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. Come now, you must compose yourself and return to your duties. Act as though nothing has transpired. Perhaps, if we are fortunate, the Duke will depart tomorrow, and this will all fade like a dream." But Evelyn knew, even as she nodded and dried her tears, that this would not fade. Whatever had begun between her and Theodore Hawthorne had taken root too deeply to be dismissed or forgotten. For better or worse, her life had been irrevocably altered by those moments in the rose garden. The remainder of the day passed in a haze of tension. Lady Pemberton summoned Evelyn to her private sitting room that evening, her face rigid with fury. Lucinda sat nearby, dabbing at red-rimmed eyes with a lace handkerchief, the picture of wounded sensibility. "You have overstepped yourself most grievously," Lady Pemberton began without preamble. "I do not know what arts you employed to attract His Grace's attention, but I will not tolerate such scheming in my household. You will remain in your room for the duration of the Duke's visit. You will not show your face anywhere he might see you. Is that understood?" "Yes, Aunt," Evelyn replied quietly, her hands clasped before her. "I should turn you out entirely," Lady Pemberton continued, her voice shaking with rage. "After all the charity I have shown you, all the kindness, to have you repay me with such betrayal—" "Mother, please," Lucinda interjected, though her voice held more calculation than distress. "Perhaps we are overreacting. Surely His Grace was merely being polite to a member of the household. Tomorrow I shall have another opportunity to secure his interest. He cannot truly prefer that drab little mouse to me." Lady Pemberton's expression shifted, hope warring with suspicion. "You are quite right, my dear. Of course he was merely being polite. His breeding would demand no less. We shall pretend this unfortunate incident never occurred." She turned her cold gaze back to Evelyn. "You are dismissed. Remember what I have said. I do not wish to see you again until after His Grace has departed." Evelyn curtsied and fled the room, her heart pounding. She made her way to her small chamber and sank onto her narrow bed, wondering how everything had become so complicated so quickly. Through her tiny window, she could see the lights of the main rooms where Theodore and the other guests were no doubt enjoying their evening meal. Was he thinking of her? Did he regret his impulsive declaration in the garden? Or had it all been merely a momentary interest that would fade with the morning light? She did not know how long she sat there before a soft knock came at her door. Mrs. Dawson entered, carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and tea. "You missed dinner," the housekeeper said gently, setting the tray on the small table. "I thought you might be hungry." "Thank you," Evelyn murmured, though she had no appetite. "Mrs. Dawson, what am I to do?" The older woman sat beside her on the bed, taking her hand. "You must be strong, child. Whatever comes, you must remember that you are worthy of love and respect, no matter what your aunt or anyone else might say. Your birth does not define your value. Your circumstances do not determine your worth." "The Duke said something similar," Evelyn said softly. "He called my aunt cruel for failing to see it." "Did he now?" Mrs. Dawson's lips curved in a small smile. "Then perhaps he is wiser than most men of his station. But wisdom does not always translate to action, Evelyn. He may mean well, but the pressure he will face from his own family, from society, will be immense. A duke does not marry a penniless bastard without consequences. I know, Evelyn whispered. I know all of this, yet I cannot help but hope. Then hope, Mrs. Dawson said, squeezing her hand. But hope carefully, child, and prepare yourself for the possibility that this may not end as you wish. The following morning, Evelyn obeyed her aunt's command and remained in her room. She could hear the sounds of the household below, the preparations for breakfast, the murmur of voices. Mrs. Dawson brought her meals and what news she dared share. The Duke had been quiet during breakfast, responding to Lucinda's attempts at conversation with polite but distant courtesy. Lady Pemberton had grown increasingly agitated as the morning wore on, clearly sensing that her carefully laid plans were going awry. In the early afternoon, Mrs. Dawson appeared at Evelyn's door with an unusual expression, part concern, part barely suppressed excitement. "The Duke has requested a private interview with Lady Pemberton," she reported in a whisper. "They are closeted in the library this very moment. Your aunt looked quite triumphant as she went in, no doubt expecting a proposal for Lucinda's hand." Evelyn's heart sank. Of course. Whatever Theodore had said in the garden, whatever she had allowed herself to believe, the reality was unchanged. He was a duke, and dukes married eligible young ladies of fortune and breeding, not bastard nieces who existed only in the shadows. "I see," she managed, her voice steady despite the pain blooming in her chest. "Then it is as we expected. He will marry Lucinda, and life will continue as before." But Mrs. Dawson shook her head slowly, her eyes gleaming with something that might have been hope. "I am not so certain, child. His Grace's expression when he made his request did not strike me as that of a man eager to propose to Miss Lucinda. There was something else there, something determined and almost rebellious." Before Evelyn could respond, a commotion erupted below. Raised voices carried up the stairs, Lady Pemberton's shriek of outrage cutting through the afternoon quiet like a knife. Both women froze, listening to the sounds of an argument that grew progressively more heated. "How dare you?" Lady Pemberton's voice rang through the manor. "After all the courtesy I have shown you, after opening my home and introducing you to my daughter." Theodore's reply was too low to distinguish, but his tone carried absolute authority. More shrieking from Lady Pemberton, then the sound of a door slamming with tremendous force. Footsteps pounded up the main staircase, and Mrs. Dawson quickly pulled Evelyn back from the door. "Stay here," the housekeeper commanded. "Do not show yourself until we know what has transpired." But Evelyn could not obey. She slipped from her room and made her way to the servants' staircase that opened onto the upper gallery. From this vantage point, hidden behind a carved pillar, she could see Lady Pemberton pacing the hallway like a caged animal, her face contorted with fury. Lucinda stood nearby, her expression a mixture of shock and humiliation. "The audacity!" Lady Pemberton spat. "The absolute audacity of the man! To come into my home to accept my hospitality, and then to make such a preposterous demand." "What did he want, Mother?" Lucinda asked, her voice small and frightened. "What did he say?" Lady Pemberton whirled on her daughter. "He has asked permission to court Evelyn, that insignificant, worthless little bastard. He has declared his intention to pursue her hand in marriage." The words struck Evelyn like a physical blow. She gripped the pillar for support, certain she must have misheard, but Lucinda's wail of despair confirmed that she had heard correctly. "How could he prefer her to me?" Lucinda sobbed. "What has she done to bewitch him? Mother, you must forbid it, you must send her away." "I have already informed His Grace that I will grant no such permission," Lady Pemberton said coldly. "I have told him in no uncertain terms that Evelyn is my ward and that I will not countenance any connection between them. The girl will be sent to a convent in Yorkshire tomorrow morning. I have a cousin who is abbess there. Evelyn will take vows and live out her days in prayer and contemplation, far from any opportunity to corrupt the Duke's judgment." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. A convent, tomorrow. Lady Pemberton meant to dispose of her as efficiently as one might discard a broken vase. The life of a nun, perpetual enclosure, eternal silence, the death of every hope and dream. It was a fate worse than death for someone who had already lived too much of her life in shadows. "What did the Duke say to that?" Lucinda asked, her tears forgotten in her curiosity. "He was most displeased," Lady Pemberton admitted, and there was a thread of uncertainty in her voice now. He threatened, but no, he would not dare. He may be a duke, but he cannot force me to surrender my ward against my will. The law is clear on such matters. Evelyn is mine to dispose of as I see fit until she reaches her majority, and that is still 2 years hence. Evelyn barely heard the rest of their conversation. She stumbled back to her room, her mind reeling. Theodore had been sincere. He had truly meant what he said in the garden. He had gone to her aunt and formally requested permission to court her. And now Lady Pemberton meant to lock her away in a convent to prevent any possibility of such a union. Mrs. Dawson found her some time later, curled on her bed and staring at nothing. The housekeeper's face was drawn with grief and determination. "I have heard what Lady Pemberton plans," she said without preamble, "and I will not allow it to happen. You are not going to that convent, Evelyn, not if I have any power to prevent it." "What can you do?" Evelyn asked dully. "She is my legal guardian. She has the right to place me wherever she chooses." "Perhaps," Mrs. Dawson said slowly, "but the Duke also has rights and resources that far exceed your aunt's petty authority. He must be made aware of her intentions. If he knows that she means to send you away tomorrow, he will surely act to prevent it." "How can he?" Evelyn demanded, sitting up. "He cannot legally interfere. You said so yourself. My aunt has authority over me until I reach my majority." "There are ways," Mrs. Dawson said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If the Duke were to claim that your aunt is acting against your best interests, if he were to bring the matter before a magistrate, he might be able to have guardianship transferred. It would cause a tremendous scandal, but it could be done, and a duke has influence that can smooth over many difficulties." "But he has already left Hartwell," Evelyn said, despair weighing down every word. "I heard his carriage depart over an hour ago. By the time word could reach him in London, I will already be on my way to Yorkshire." Mrs. Dawson's expression turned crafty. "His Grace did leave Hartwell Manor, this is true, but I have it on good authority from one of the grooms that he has taken rooms at the Red Lion Inn in the village. He told the innkeeper that he has business in the area and will remain there for several days." Hope kindled in Evelyn's chest, fragile and frightening. "He stayed, even after my aunt refused his request?" "It would seem so," Mrs. Dawson confirmed, "which suggests to me that he is not prepared to accept Lady Pemberton's decision as final. But he does not know about the convent, Evelyn. He does not know how urgently he must act." "Then someone must tell him," Evelyn said, rising from the bed with new determination. "But how? I am watched constantly, and if I tried to leave the manor, my aunt would know immediately." "You cannot go," Mrs. Dawson agreed. "But I can. Lady Pemberton has no reason to suspect me, and I often walk to the village on household business. I can carry a message to His Grace at the inn without drawing undue attention." "Mrs. Dawson, you cannot," Evelyn protested. "If my aunt discovers what you have done, she will dismiss you without a character. You will lose your position, your home." "Child, I am old," Mrs. Dawson said gently. "I have saved enough over the years to live modestly for whatever time remains to me. But you have your whole life ahead of you. I will not stand by and watch that life be buried in a Yorkshire convent, because your aunt is too proud and cruel to see what is before her eyes. You deserve happiness, Evelyn. You deserve love. And if that Duke is fool enough to offer both, then I will do whatever is in my power to help you claim them." Tears streamed down Evelyn's face as she embraced the only mother she had ever truly known. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything you have been to me, for everything you have done." "Hush now," Mrs. Dawson said, patting her back. "Save your thanks for when you are safely wed to your Duke. Now quickly, you must write him a letter. Tell him what is planned for tomorrow. Tell him everything your aunt said. Leave nothing out." Evelyn sat at the small table and took up pen and paper with trembling hands. The words came in a rush, her neat script covering page after page as she poured out the whole terrible situation. She told Theodore of her aunt's fury, of the planned journey to the Yorkshire convent, of her fear and desperation. She told him, too, of her feelings, the connection she had felt in the kitchen, the wonder of their conversation in the rose garden, the way he had made her feel seen and valued for the first time in her life. She signed the letter simply. "Yours, if you will have me, Evelyn. and sealed it with a wafer, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the task. Mrs. Dawson tucked the letter into her bodice and pulled her shawl around her shoulders. "I shall go to the village now. With luck, I will be back before dinner, and no one will think anything of my absence. Stay in your room, Evelyn. Do not give your aunt any cause to advance her plans or increase her vigilance." "Be careful," Evelyn pleaded. "And Mrs. Dawson, if this somehow succeeds, if by some miracle Theodore is able to prevent my being sent away, I will never forget what you have done for me. I will see that you are cared for, that you want for nothing." The housekeeper smiled, tears gleaming in her own eyes. "I want nothing more than to see you happy, child. That will be payment enough for any risk I take today." She slipped from the room, leaving Evelyn alone with her fears and her desperate hopes. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn stood at her small window, watching the road that led to the village, praying that Mrs. Dawson would return safely, that Theodore would receive the letter, that somehow impossibly this nightmare would end in something other than her imprisonment in a convent. Darkness was falling when Mrs. Dawson finally returned. She came directly to Evelyn's room, her face flushed from her rapid walk but her eyes bright with satisfaction. "It is done," she announced quietly. "I delivered your letter into the Duke's own hands. He read it there in the inn's parlour, and Evelyn, I wish you could have seen his face. He went white as snow, and then such fury came into his eyes as I have never witnessed in a gentleman. He said, and these were his exact words, 'Tell Miss Ashford that she is not to fear. Tell her that I will come for her, and no power on earth will prevent me from claiming her as my own.'" Evelyn pressed her hands to her mouth, torn between laughter and tears. "He truly said that?" "Upon my word," Mrs. Dawson confirmed. "And then he called for his secretary and began issuing orders like a general preparing for battle. He was writing letters even as I left, dispatching riders to London and elsewhere. Whatever he plans, it will be swift and decisive." "But what can he do?" Evelyn asked, pacing the small confines of her room. "My aunt plans to send me away at first light. Even if Theodore rides here tonight, she will not let him see me. She will not be moved by his arguments or his demands." "Then we must ensure she has no opportunity to send you away," Mrs. Dawson said thoughtfully. "We must delay the departure somehow, give His Grace time to arrive with whatever solution he has devised." "How can we delay it? My aunt is determined—" "Leave that to me," Mrs. Dawson said, her expression turning mischievous in a way that made her look decades younger. "I have a few tricks yet at my disposal. Now, you must eat something and try to rest. Tomorrow will be a long day, one way or another." But rest proved impossible. Evelyn lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through 100 scenarios, each more improbable than the last. How could Theodore possibly arrive in time? What power did he have to prevent Lady Pemberton from exercising her legal rights as guardian? And even if he somehow succeeded in keeping her from the convent, what then? Her aunt would never consent to their marriage, and without that consent any union would be considered scandalous at best, illegal at worst. Dawn came all too soon, grey and misty. Evelyn heard the sounds of the household stirring, preparing for the journey to Yorkshire. Lady Pemberton's voice carried up the stairs, sharp with commands to the servants. A carriage was being prepared, trunks loaded with the few possessions Evelyn would be permitted to take to her new life behind convent walls. Mrs. Dawson appeared with a breakfast tray, her face carefully neutral. "Your aunt wishes you to be ready within the hour," she reported. "The carriage leaves at 8 o'clock. "Has there been any word?" Evelyn asked desperately. "Any sign of—" "None yet, Mrs." Dawson interrupted gently, glancing toward the open door. "But the morning is young, much can happen in an hour." Evelyn forced herself to eat a few bites of bread, though it tasted like ashes in her mouth. She dressed in her travelling clothes, a simple brown dress and cloak that her aunt had provided, suitable for a woman entering religious life. As she fastened the cloak, her fingers brushing against the plain fabric, she felt the full weight of her powerlessness. She had no fortune, no connections, no recourse against her aunt's authority. Theodore might be a duke, but even dukes were bound by the laws of England, and those laws gave guardians tremendous power over their wards. At 7:30, Lady Pemberton herself appeared at Evelyn's door, her expression cold and satisfied. "It is time. The carriage awaits. You will cause no trouble, no scenes. You will go quietly and with whatever dignity you can muster, and you will not attempt to contact the Duke or anyone else. Is that understood?" "Yes, Aunt," Evelyn said quietly, her voice devoid of emotion. What else could she say? What else could she do? "Good. Come along then. The sooner we have you settled in your new home, the sooner we can put this unfortunate incident behind us." Evelyn followed her aunt down the stairs, Mrs. Dawson trailing behind with tears streaming down her weathered face. In the entrance hall, Lucinda waited, her expression triumphant. The servants stood in a line, as was customary when a member of the household departed, their faces carefully blank, though several of the younger maids dabbed at their eyes with their aprons. The carriage stood ready in the drive, the horses pawing at the gravel. A trunk containing Evelyn's few belongings had already been strapped to the back. Lady Pemberton's own maid would accompany Evelyn on the journey, serving as both companion and guard against any attempt at escape. As Evelyn stepped out into the misty morning, her heart breaking with every step, a commotion erupted at the gates. The sound of multiple horses approaching at speed, voices calling out commands. Lady Pemberton froze, her face draining of colour. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded as a party of riders swept up the drive. Theodore Hawthorne rode at their head, magnificent in riding clothes of dark green, his face set with determination. Behind him came his secretary, a stern-looking gentleman in sober attire, and two others whom Evelyn did not recognize, but whose bearing suggested positions of authority. Theodore dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward the assembled group with such command that even Lady Pemberton stepped back involuntarily. His eyes found Evelyn immediately, and the relief and fierce possessiveness in that gaze made her knees weak. "Your Grace," Lady Pemberton sputtered, rallying her composure. "What is the meaning of this intrusion? You have no right—" "I have every right," Theodore interrupted, his voice cutting through her protests like steel. "Gentlemen, if you would be so kind as to present the documents." The stern gentleman stepped forward, producing several papers sealed with official-looking stamps. "I am Mr. Aldridge, magistrate of this county. I have here an emergency petition filed by His Grace the Duke of Ashford, requesting immediate review of Miss Evelyn Ashford's guardianship based on allegations of mistreatment and coercion." Lady Pemberton's face went from white to red in an instant. "This is outrageous. I am her legal guardian, appointed by her own father's will." "A father who never acknowledged her existence," Theodore said coldly. "A father who abandoned both mother and child. The legitimacy of such guardianship is questionable at best, but we need not debate that point, Lady Pemberton, because I have found a far more elegant solution to this dilemma." He turned to the second gentleman, who stepped forward with a warm smile that contrasted sharply with the tension of the moment. "Allow me to introduce the Archbishop of Canterbury's personal representative, Father Benedict. He has graciously agreed to perform a rather urgent ceremony." Evelyn's heart lurched violently. "Theodore, what are you—" "I am doing what I should have done the moment I saw you in that kitchen," Theodore said, moving to stand directly before her. He took both her hands in his, heedless of the watching servants and Lady Pemberton's strangled gasp of outrage. "I am claiming you as my own, Evelyn Ashford. I am asking you to marry me, here and now, this very morning. Once we are wed, your aunt's guardianship becomes void. You will be my wife, my duchess, and no power on earth can send you to a convent or anywhere else against your will." "You cannot do this," Lady Pemberton shrieked. "I forbid it. She is my ward. She is under my authority." "For approximately 3 more minutes," Mr. Aldridge said calmly, consulting his pocket watch. "After which time, if Miss Ashford consents to this marriage, her status will change irrevocably. Your Grace, perhaps we should proceed. Time, as they say, is of the essence." Theodore's eyes never left Evelyn's face. "What say you, my dear? Will you have me? Will you trust me enough to take this leap together? I know we have known each other for barely 2 days. I know this is mad and impulsive and contrary to every rule of proper courtship. But I also know that what I feel for you is real and true, and that I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of the gift of your love." Evelyn's vision blurred with tears. Around her she could hear Lady Pemberton's continued protests, Lucinda's wails of dismay, Mrs. Dawson's soft weeping. But all of it faded to insignificance beside Theodore's steady gaze, the warmth of his hands clasping hers, the promise she saw written in every line of his handsome face. "Yes," she whispered, then louder with more conviction than she had ever felt about anything in her life. "Yes, Theodore, I will marry you." His smile transformed the misty morning into something glorious. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing them with such tenderness that her tears spilled over completely. "Then let us waste no more time. Father Benedict?" The ceremony that followed would later be described by those present as the most extraordinary wedding they had ever witnessed. It took place not in a church, but on the gravel drive of Hartwell Manor, with a stunned household as witnesses. Evelyn, in her plain brown travelling dress, and Theodore in his riding clothes, spoke their vows with Father Benedict presiding. Lady Pemberton continued to protest throughout, threatening legal action and social ruin, but her voice grew progressively weaker as the reality of the situation became clear. When Father Benedict pronounced them man and wife, Theodore drew Evelyn into his arms and kissed her with such passion and tenderness that several of the watching maids sighed audibly. Lady Pemberton made one last attempt to intervene, reaching for Evelyn's arm as though to pull her away, but Theodore moved smoothly to block her, his expression turning cold and dangerous. "Touch my wife again, madam, and you will discover precisely how unpleasant I can make life for those who threaten what is mine," he said quietly. "Evelyn is now the Duchess of Ashford. She is under my protection, my care, my authority. You have no further claim on her whatsoever. In fact, I suggest you consider your own position most carefully. Should I choose to make known the full extent of your abuse and neglect of your ward, your reputation in society would be destroyed utterly. The only reason I do not do so immediately is out of consideration for my wife's sensibilities. She has suffered enough at your hands. I will not add to her pain by creating a public scandal." Lady Pemberton's mouth worked soundlessly. Beside her, Lucinda collapsed against her mother, sobbing hysterically. The household servant stood frozen in shock, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Theodore turned to Mrs. Dawson, who hovered nearby with tears streaming down her face. "You must be the redoubtable Mrs. Dawson, whose letter gave me the warning I needed to act in time. You have my eternal gratitude, madam. My wife has told me of your kindness to her over the years, of how you have been the only mother she has known. I hope you will consent to come with us to Ashford House and continue in a position of honour within our household. Her Grace will need familiar faces around her as she adjusts to her new life." Mrs. Dawson curtsied deeply, her voice breaking with emotion. "It would be my greatest privilege, Your Grace." "Excellent. Gather your things and you shall travel with us in the ducal carriage." Theodore looked around at the assembled servants. In fact, any member of this household who wishes to seek employment with the Duke of Ashford need only present themselves at Ashford House within the fortnight. I suspect Her Grace will wish to surround herself with friendly faces, and I can always use good staff who have shown loyalty and kindness to those in need. Several of the younger servants exchanged hopeful glances, while Lady Pemberton looked as though she might swoon. Theodore ignored her completely, turning his attention back to Evelyn. "Come, my dear wife," he said gently, offering her his arm. "Let us leave this place and begin our new life together. I have a special license that will allow us to formalize our marriage in London tomorrow, and then we shall journey to Ashford House in Hampshire. I think you will find it a far more welcoming home than you have known here." Evelyn placed her hand on his arm, still feeling as though she were moving through a dream. "But my things can be sent for later, or replaced entirely," Theodore said dismissively. "You need nothing from this house, Evelyn. Everything you require will be provided. I promise you, you will never want for anything again." As they walked toward the magnificent carriage bearing the Ashford coat of arms, Evelyn glanced back once at Hartwell Manor. Lady Pemberton stood rigid with fury and humiliation, Lucinda weeping dramatically beside her. The servants milled about in confusion, their carefully ordered world thrown into chaos. Only Mrs. Dawson moved with purpose, hurrying toward the house to collect her belongings so she might join them. "Do you regret it?" Theodore asked softly as he handed her into the luxurious carriage. "The manner of our marriage, the abruptness of it all?" Evelyn settled onto the plush velvet seats, looking up at the man who was now her husband. "I regret nothing," she said honestly. "I'm terrified and overwhelmed, and I can scarcely believe any of this is real. But I do not regret it." Theodore took the seat beside her, pulling her close against his side. "Good, because I meant every word I said in the garden, Evelyn. I will spend the rest of our lives ensuring that you are loved and cherished and honored as you deserve. You will never again be the forgotten niece, the bastard child, the shadow in the corner. You are my Duchess, my partner, my heart, and I will make certain that all of England knows your worth." Mrs. Dawson joined them shortly, her few possessions hastily packed into a valise. As the carriage rolled down the drive away from Hartwell Manor, Evelyn felt as though she was shedding an old skin, leaving behind years of pain and rejection. She pressed closer to Theodore's warmth, marveling at the strength of the arms that held her, the steady beat of the heart beneath her ear. The journey to London passed in a blur. Theodore seemed determined to use every moment to learn more about his new wife, asking questions about her childhood, her interests, her dreams. Evelyn found herself talking more freely than she ever had, the words flowing easily under his gentle encouragement. He listened with complete attention, his expression alternating between tenderness, when she spoke of happy memories with Mrs. Dawson, and fury when she touched on her aunt's cruelties. They stopped at the finest inn along the route, where Theodore had arranged for rooms prepared in advance. The innkeeper nearly fell over himself, bowing and scraping before the Duke and his new Duchess, ushering them to the best chambers with a flurry of apologies for the inadequacy of his humble establishment. That evening, as Evelyn stood at the window of their shared suite, watching the sun set over the rolling countryside, Theodore came to stand behind her. His arms encircled her waist, and he rested his chin on top of her head. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. Evelyn turned in his embrace, looking up into those grey eyes that had seen her truly from the very first moment. "I am more than happy. I am in awe. Yesterday I thought my life was over, that I would be locked away in a convent with no hope of escape. Today, I am a duchess, married to a man who looks at me as though I am precious beyond measure. It feels like a fairy tale. Then I shall endeavour to ensure our story has the happiest of endings," Theodore murmured, lowering his head to capture her lips in a kiss that promised everything: passion, devotion, partnership, love. They arrived in London the following afternoon, where the formalities of their marriage were repeated in a small private ceremony at one of the city's most prestigious churches. Theodore had invited only his closest confidants, his man of business, his secretary, a few trusted friends from his club. News of the Duke of Ashford's sudden marriage had already begun to spread through the ton, creating a sensation that would fuel gossip for months to come. In the days that followed, as they prepared to journey on to Ashford House, Evelyn had her first taste of what life as a duchess would entail. Theodore took her to the finest modistes on Bond Street, insisting she be outfitted with an entirely new wardrobe befitting her station. He introduced her to his solicitors, ensuring that she understood the considerable fortune that was now at her disposal. He presented her to his aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Pemberton, a formidable woman who took one look at Evelyn and declared her a vast improvement over those insipid misses who have been throwing themselves at my nephew for years. But it was when they finally arrived at Ashford House that Evelyn truly understood the magnitude of the change in her circumstances. The estate sprawled across the Hampshire countryside, its ancient stone walls covered in ivy, its gardens laid out with mathematical precision. The house itself was a masterpiece of architecture, with soaring ceilings, priceless artwork, and furnishings that spoke of generations of wealth and taste. The staff lined up to meet their new mistress, over 100 servants whose livelihoods now rested in Evelyn's hands. She felt overwhelmed by the responsibility, intimidated by the thought of managing such a vast household. But Theodore stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor, and Mrs. Dawson had been installed as head housekeeper, her familiar face a comfort amid so much strangeness. "Welcome home, Your Grace," the butler intoned formally. Your Grace. The title still sounded foreign to Evelyn's ears, impossible to associate with herself. Yet when she looked at Theodore and saw the pride and love shining in his eyes, she felt something shift inside her. Perhaps she could grow into this role. Perhaps, with time and support, she could become the Duchess that Ashford House deserved. The first weeks of married life passed in a whirlwind of activity. Evelyn had much to learn about managing the household, about the social obligations of her new position, about navigating the complex world of the aristocracy. Theodore proved himself an attentive and patient husband, guiding her through the intricacies of her duties without ever making her feel inadequate. He seemed to take genuine pleasure in watching her grow into her role, celebrating each small victory as she mastered some new aspect of running the great estate. But more than that, Theodore courted her with a dedication that took her breath away. Despite the fact that they were already married, he seemed determined to win her heart properly. He brought her flowers from the greenhouse each morning, rare blooms that filled their private chambers with perfume. He took her riding across the estate, showing her every corner of the land that was now hers as well as his. He read to her in the evenings by the fire, sharing his favorite books and asking for her opinions on everything from poetry to politics. And at night, when they retired to their shared chambers, Theodore made love to her with such tenderness and passion that Evelyn discovered depths of feeling she had never imagined possible. He worshipped her body as though it were a precious gift, murmuring endearments against her skin, making her feel beautiful and desired in ways that healed wounds she had not fully acknowledged. Mrs. Dawson thrived in her new position, her spirits lifted by the kindness and respect shown to her by both the Duke and Duchess. She had a comfortable suite of rooms, a generous salary, and the satisfaction of seeing the child she had raised finally receiving the love and security she deserved. In the evenings, when her duties were complete, she would sometimes sit with Evelyn in the Duchess's private parlour, the two women sharing tea and conversation as they had done in the quiet moments at Hartwell Manor. "You have blossomed," Mrs. Dawson observed one evening, studying Evelyn's face with affectionate satisfaction. "There is a light in your eyes that was never there before, a confidence in your bearing. Marriage agrees with you, child." "Theodore agrees with me," Evelyn corrected with a soft smile. "He makes me feel as though I have value beyond my usefulness, as though I matter simply for being myself. I never knew such feelings were possible." "That is what love does," Mrs. Dawson said gently. "Real love, the kind that sees past surfaces to the heart beneath. His Grace is a rare man, Evelyn. Treasure what you have found together." "I do," Evelyn assured her. "Every moment of every day I am grateful for the miracle that brought him into my life." 3 weeks after their arrival at Ashford House, an invitation arrived that brought the first true test of Evelyn's new status. The Prince Regent himself was hosting a ball at Carlton House, and the Duke and Duchess of Ashford were commanded to attend. Theodore read the invitation with a slight frown, then looked at Evelyn with concern. "We need not go if you do not feel ready," he said immediately. "I can send our regrets, claim illness or pressing estate business." "No," Evelyn interrupted, surprising herself with her decisiveness. "I am your wife, your Duchess. I will not hide from society or give credence to those who might whisper that I am unworthy of my position. If we are to attend such events eventually, we may as well begin now." Pride flashed across Theodore's face. "You are magnificent," he said, pulling her into his arms. "And you are absolutely right. We shall attend, and society will see for themselves what a treasure I have claimed as my bride." The days leading up to the ball were filled with preparations. Evelyn's new wardrobe was extensive, but Theodore insisted that she needed something truly spectacular for her debut before the Prince Regent. He summoned the most fashionable modiste in London, who created a gown of silver silk that shimmered like moonlight with every movement. Sapphires from the Ashford family collection were reset into a magnificent necklace and earrings that complemented the gown perfectly. When Evelyn saw herself in the mirror on the evening of the ball, she barely recognized the elegant woman staring back at her. Gone was the plain grey dress and apologetic demeanour of Lady Pemberton's forgotten niece. In her place stood a duchess, regal and beautiful, with confidence born from the love of a man who saw her true worth. Theodore appeared in the doorway of her dressing room, resplendent in formal evening attire. He stopped short at the sight of her, his eyes darkening with appreciation and desire. "You will be the most beautiful woman in the room," he said huskily, "and I shall be the most envied man in all of England." The ball at Carlton House exceeded even Evelyn's most elaborate imaginings. The rooms blazed with the light of thousands of candles reflected in gilt mirrors and crystal chandeliers. The cream of English society filled the halls, bedecked in jewels and finery that represented fortunes. Music floated through the air, mingling with laughter and the rustle of silk. When the Duke and Duchess of Ashford were announced, a ripple of interest swept through the assembled guests. Everyone had heard the scandalous tale of the Duke's sudden marriage to his hostess's poor relation, the hasty ceremony performed to prevent the bride being sent to a convent. Speculation had run wild about the mysterious new Duchess, with some claiming she must be a great beauty who had bewitched the Duke, others suggesting he had been trapped by some clever scheme. The reality silenced many of the gossips immediately. Evelyn entered on Theodore's arm with natural grace, her bearing regal despite the butterflies churning in her stomach. She met curious stares with calm composure, her expression serene even as she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. The Prince Regent himself approached to greet them, his portly figure resplendent in a coat dripping with decorations. "Ashford, we had heard rumors of your marriage but scarcely credited them. You are not a man known for impulsive behavior. Perhaps I simply had not yet found sufficient cause for impulse, Your Highness," Theodore replied smoothly. "May I present my wife, the Duchess of Ashford?" Evelyn curtsied deeply, drawing on every lesson in deportment she had absorbed over years of watching Lucinda's careful training. "Your Highness, the honor is mine." The Prince Regent studied her with shrewd eyes, then smiled. "Ashford, you have done well for yourself. Beauty and grace are a rare combination. Welcome to court, Your Grace. We look forward to seeing more of you." It was a clear signal of approval, and the effect was immediate. Those who might have cut the new Duchess for her questionable origins now pressed forward to make her acquaintance. Invitations were extended, compliments offered, connections established. Theodore remained at Evelyn's side throughout, his hand at the small of her back a constant reassurance, his pride in her evident to all who observed them. The evening progressed with dancing and conversation. Evelyn found herself surprised by how much she enjoyed the experience, the music and movement, the stimulation of meeting new people and navigating complex social dynamics. She had always possessed intelligence and charm, but Lady Pemberton had systematically suppressed those qualities. Now, with Theodore's support and encouragement, they emerged fully. Late in the evening, as Evelyn stepped away to the ladies' retiring room to adjust a pin in her hair, she encountered Lady Pemberton and Lucinda. The sight of them sent a jolt through her system, all her newfound confidence wavering for a moment. Her aunt looked older, her face pinched with bitterness, while Lucinda appeared wan and lifeless, her beauty dimmed by unhappiness. They stared at each other in frozen silence for a long moment. Then Lady Pemberton drew herself up, preparing to deliver some cutting remark, but Evelyn spoke first. "Aunt Margaret, Lucinda, I hope you are both well." The simple courtesy, delivered with genuine concern, seemed to rob Lady Pemberton of her planned attack. She deflated slightly, her eyes dropping from Evelyn's face. "You look well," she admitted grudgingly. "The Duchess of Ashford. I suppose you are quite satisfied with yourself." "I am satisfied with my life," Evelyn replied gently. "But I take no pleasure in your distress, Aunt. Despite everything, you gave me a home when I had none. I am grateful for that, even if the rest was difficult." "Grateful," Lady Pemberton repeated bitterly. "You stole the match I had arranged for Lucinda, destroyed our family's prospects." "I stole nothing," Evelyn interrupted firmly. "Theodore made his own choice, as was his right. He did not want Lucinda, Aunt. He wanted me. That is neither my fault nor my triumph over you. It simply is." Lucinda spoke for the first time, her voice small and broken. "Why did he choose you? What do you have that I do not?" Evelyn looked at her cousin with compassion. "I cannot answer that question, Lucinda. I can only tell you that genuine affection cannot be manufactured or coerced. It either exists or it does not. You are beautiful and accomplished, and you will find a gentleman who values those qualities and loves you for yourself. But Theodore was never meant to be that gentleman." She moved past them toward the door, then paused and looked back. "If you ever have need of assistance, Aunt, you need only write to me. Despite our history, I bear you no ill will. I hope you can find peace and happiness in your own lives, as I have found in mine." She left them standing in stunned silence and returned to the ballroom, where Theodore waited with barely concealed impatience. The moment he saw her, relief flooded his features. "I was beginning to worry," he admitted, drawing her back onto the dance floor. "You were gone rather longer than expected." "I encountered my aunt and Lucinda," Evelyn explained, as they moved through the figures of a waltz. "It was not as terrible as I feared. I think perhaps we have reached an understanding of sorts." Theodore's expression turned fierce. "If they upset you—" "They did not," Evelyn assured him. "In fact, I found that facing them no longer holds the power it once might have. I am not the frightened, powerless girl I was at Hartwell Manor. I am your wife, your Duchess, and I know my own worth now. They cannot take that from me." "No," Theodore agreed, pulling her fractionally closer than the dance strictly required. "They cannot. You are extraordinary, Evelyn, do you know that? In the space of a few short weeks, you have transformed from a woman who existed in shadows to one who commands every room she enters. I am in awe of your strength." "I had good reason to find that strength," Evelyn murmured, her eyes locked with his. "I had you believing in me, seeing me as I truly am. That makes all the difference." As the ball drew to a close and they prepared to depart, Evelyn reflected on how far she had travelled from that afternoon in Hartwell Manor's kitchen. She had been nothing then, nobody, existing only on the periphery of life. Now she stood at the centre of her own story, loved and honoured, her future stretching out before her bright with possibility. The carriage ride home to Ashford House was peaceful. Evelyn nestled against Theodore's side, both of them weary but content. The house welcomed them with warm light spilling from the windows, servants waiting to attend to their needs, Mrs. Dawson there to inquire how the evening had proceeded. "It was perfect," Evelyn told her, squeezing the older woman's hands. Everything was absolutely perfect. Later, in the privacy of their chambers, as Theodore helped her remove the sapphires and began unlacing her gown, Evelyn caught sight of their reflection in the mirror. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford, united in love and partnership, their future together assured. "Do you have any regrets?" Theodore asked quietly, echoing his question from their wedding day. "About the speed of our marriage, the unconventional nature of our courtship." Evelyn turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "My only regret is that I did not meet you sooner, that I spent so many years without knowing such happiness was possible. But perhaps we needed to wait for precisely the right moment, the right circumstances. Perhaps everything happened exactly as it was meant to." "I like that philosophy," Theodore murmured, lowering his head to kiss her. "It suggests that every difficulty we faced, every obstacle overcome, led us inevitably to each other." "Precisely," Evelyn agreed. "And now we have the rest of our lives to build something beautiful together." The months that followed established a pattern of happiness that Evelyn had never imagined possible. She grew into her role as Duchess with increasing confidence, managing the vast household with skill and introducing innovations that improved the lives of both servants and tenants. She established a school for the estate children, ensuring they received education regardless of their families' circumstances. She created programs to support the elderly and infirm, drawing on her own experiences of vulnerability to inform her charity. Theodore watched her flourish with undisguised pride. He had known from that first moment in the kitchen that Evelyn possessed extraordinary qualities. But even he was surprised by the depth of her compassion and the breadth of her capabilities. She was not content to be merely decorative, to fill the role of Duchess in name only. She engaged fully with every aspect of her position, using her power and resources to effect genuine change. Their marriage deepened with each passing day. They learned each other's habits and preferences, developed private jokes and shared rituals. Theodore discovered that Evelyn had a talent for music, though she had rarely been permitted to practice at Hartwell Manor. He installed a magnificent pianoforte in the music room and hired the finest teachers, delighting in the sounds of her playing that filled the house each afternoon. Evelyn learned that Theodore, for all his ducal authority, harbored a love of poetry and philosophy that he rarely shared with others. She spent evenings listening to him read aloud, discussing the ideas and themes, challenging his interpretations with her own sharp intelligence. He came to rely on her counsel in matters both personal and political, valuing her insights and her unique perspective, born from years of observation from society's margins. 6 months after their marriage, Evelyn discovered she was carrying their first child. The news sent Theodore into transports of joy, tempered by fierce protectiveness. He hovered anxiously, insisting she rest more than she wished, summoning the finest physicians from London to ensure her health and comfort. "You are being ridiculous," Evelyn told him fondly when he tried to prevent her from walking in the gardens. "Women have been bearing children since the dawn of time. I am perfectly healthy and capable of moderate exercise." "You are not just any woman," Theodore replied stubbornly. "You are my wife, the love of my life, and I will not take any chances with your well-being." "Then walk with me," Evelyn suggested, taking his arm. "Keep me company and cease this fretting. Our child needs a father who is calm and confident, not one who starts at every shadow." Theodore laughed despite himself. "When did you become so wise?" "I have always been wise," Evelyn teased. "You're only just now noticing." They walked through the rose gardens, now in the full bloom of early summer. The flowers reminded Evelyn of that afternoon at Hartwell Manor, the moment when Theodore had looked into her eyes and seen her truly for the first time. So much had changed since then, yet the essential truth remained the same. They had recognized each other as kindred spirits, two halves of a whole, finally united. "Do you ever think about what your life might have been if I had not wandered into that kitchen?" Theodore asked quietly, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. "Sometimes," Evelyn admitted. "I would have been sent to the convent, lived out my days in silence and isolation. But Theodore, I try not to dwell on what might have been. I prefer to focus on what is. This beautiful life we have built together, the future we are creating. That is real and precious. Everything else is merely shadow." "You are wiser than I deserve," Theodore murmured, bringing her hand to his lips. "But I am grateful beyond measure that fate brought us together, however unlikely our meeting might have seemed." The child, a daughter they named Catherine, was born on a crisp autumn morning, her first cries filling Ashford House with joy. Theodore wept openly when he held his daughter for the first time, overcome by love and wonder. Evelyn watched her husband cradling their child and felt her heart swell with emotions almost too powerful to contain. "She is perfect," Theodore whispered, tracing his finger along Catherine's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." "She is ours," Evelyn replied simply, "and she will grow up knowing she is loved and valued, that her worth is inherent and not dependent on circumstances of birth or fortune. We will give her everything we can, Theodore, love and security and the freedom to become whoever she is meant to be." "Yes," Theodore agreed fervently. "She will never doubt her place in this world, never question whether she is wanted or worthy. She will have what you were denied, Evelyn. A childhood of safety and affection." Mrs. Dawson, now showing the effects of age but still sharp as ever, became Catherine's devoted nursemaid. She rocked the baby for hours, singing the same lullabies she had once sung to Evelyn. The circle of love and care continued across generations, healing old wounds and creating new bonds. As Catherine grew from infant to toddler, Ashford House rang with her laughter and the patter of small feet. Evelyn and Theodore marveled at every milestone, from her first smile to her first steps. They filled her nursery with books and toys, determined to nurture her curiosity and intelligence. And when she was old enough to ask questions, they answered honestly, explaining that while the world could sometimes be unkind, love and determination could overcome even the greatest obstacles. 3 years after Catherine's birth, a son arrived, Charles, named for Theodore's late father. And 2 years after that, another daughter, Margaret, named in a gesture of reconciliation for Evelyn's aunt. The nursery grew crowded with children's voices, the estate alive with the next generation of Hawthorns. Lady Pemberton, who had maintained a stiff distance after that encounter at the ball, softened when news of little Margaret's name reached her. She sent a letter, awkward and stilted but genuine in its emotion, thanking Evelyn for the gesture and expressing regret for her past treatment. It was not a full apology, perhaps, but it was a beginning. Evelyn wrote back warmly, inviting her aunt to visit Ashford House and meet her great-nieces and nephew. The visit, when it occurred, was tense at first, but gradually eased into something approaching family harmony. Lady Pemberton held baby Margaret with tears in her eyes, acknowledging that she had been wrong, that she had let pride and ambition blind her to what truly mattered. Lucinda, who had eventually married a respectable baronet, came as well. She and Evelyn would never be close, but they achieved a cordial relationship based on mutual respect, if not affection. The past could not be erased, but it could be accepted and moved beyond. 10 years after that fateful afternoon in Hartwell Manor's kitchen, Evelyn stood in the portrait gallery of Ashford House, studying the new painting that had just been hung. It depicted the Duke and Duchess with their 3 children, captured by one of England's finest artists. Theodore stood tall and proud, his hand resting on young Charles's shoulder. Evelyn sat in an elegant chair, baby Margaret in her arms, while Catherine stood beside her mother, her expression already showing signs of the intelligence and character she would carry into adulthood. "It is quite good, is it not?" Theodore said, coming to stand beside his wife, "though I think it fails to capture your true radiance." Evelyn laughed. "You are biased, husband." "Undoubtedly," Theodore agreed, slipping his arm around her waist. "But I have earned the right to my bias through years of devotion and observation. I know your face better than my own. I see the woman you were when I first encountered you in that midnight kitchen, frightened and uncertain but already possessing such hidden strength. And I see the woman you have become, confident, compassionate, beloved by all who know you. The transition has been extraordinary to witness." "I could not have made that transition without you," Evelyn said softly, leaning into his embrace. "You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You believed in me when I had ceased to believe in myself. You gave me not just a new life, Theodore, but a new understanding of what life could be." "We gave that to each other," Theodore corrected gently. "You think I was unchanged by our meeting. I was arrogant in my assumptions, certain that I knew what I wanted from life and marriage. Then I looked into your eyes and discovered I knew nothing at all. You taught me that love is not about social position or calculated advantage. It is about recognition and connection, about finding the one soul that answers your own across whatever distance or obstacles might separate you." They stood together in comfortable silence, contemplating the portrait and the journey it represented. From that first improbable meeting to this moment of established happiness, they had traveled far together. There had been obstacles and opposition, moments of doubt and difficulty, but they had faced each challenge united, their love growing stronger with each test survived. "Do you think Catherine will ask about my origins one day?" Evelyn wondered aloud. "About why she has no grandparents on my side, no family connections beyond what you have provided?" "Undoubtedly," Theodore replied. "She is too intelligent not to wonder. And when she asks, we shall tell her the truth, that you came from difficult circumstances, but rose above them through strength and grace. That her mother is the finest woman I have ever known, regardless of the circumstances of her birth. That love and character matter far more than bloodlines or fortune." "She will be proud to hear it," Evelyn said with certainty. "All our children will be. We are raising them to value substance over surface, to judge people by their actions rather than their origins. They will carry those lessons into the world and perhaps make it a better place for their presence." "They will indeed," Theodore agreed, "because they have you as their example, showing them daily what true nobility of spirit looks like." As the years continued to unfold, the Duke and Duchess of Ashford became known throughout England for their happy marriage and their progressive approach to their responsibilities. They championed causes that others overlooked, used their influence to effect meaningful change, and raised their children to be thoughtful, compassionate adults who understood the weight and privilege of their position. Evelyn never forgot the lessons of her early life, the pain of rejection, the loneliness of existing in shadows, the desperate hope that somehow things might be different. Those experiences informed everything she did as Duchess, making her sensitive to suffering others might overlook, determined to use her power to protect the vulnerable. Mrs. Dawson lived to see all 3 of her beloved charges reach adulthood, her final years comfortable and filled with love. When she passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, the entire estate mourned. Evelyn wept as she had not wept since childhood, grieving the loss of the only true mother she had ever known. They buried Mrs. Dawson in the family plot at Ashford, a final acknowledgement of her true place in their hearts. Catherine grew into a woman of remarkable intelligence and compassion, eventually marrying a viscount who valued her mind as much as her beauty. Charles inherited his father's title and his mother's social conscience, becoming a respected voice in Parliament for reform and justice. Young Margaret, true to her namesake's determined nature, shocked society by declaring her intention to become a physician, one of the first women to pursue such a path in England. Theodore and Evelyn watched their children's choices with pride, supporting them even when society raised eyebrows or voiced disapproval. They had learned long ago that convention was no substitute for conviction, that the opinions of others mattered far less than the dictates of one's own heart and conscience. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Theodore arranged a private dinner in the Rose Garden, where he had first declared his intentions all those years ago. The flowers bloomed as beautifully as ever, their perfume carried on the warm evening breeze. A small table had been set with fine china and crystal, candles casting a golden glow as twilight deepened into night. "Do you remember standing here?" Theodore asked, taking Evelyn's hand across the table. "I was so certain, so determined. I knew I had found something precious, and I would not let anything stand between us." "I remember being terrified," Evelyn admitted with a smile. "Terrified of hoping, of believing that such happiness could truly be mine. But you were so convinced, so unwavering in your certainty. It gave me courage to take that leap of faith." "Best decision I ever made," Theodore declared. "Wandering into that kitchen, looking into your eyes, recognizing my future in an instant. Some might call it madness or impulse, but I knew, deep in my soul I knew, that you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours." 25 years, Evelyn mused, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. 3 children, countless memories, a life beyond anything I could have imagined. Theodore, you gave me everything, not just wealth and position, but dignity and purpose and love. You saw the woman I could become when everyone else saw only the bastard niece, the servant, the burden. That vision of yours transformed my entire existence. "You transformed yourself," Theodore corrected gently. "I merely provided the opportunity and support. The strength, the intelligence, the compassion, those were always yours, Evelyn. They simply needed room to flourish." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful together. Their love story had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances: a midnight encounter in a manor kitchen, a desperate letter smuggled to an inn, a wedding performed on a gravel drive with a furious aunt as unwilling witness. It had all the elements of a fantastical romance, yet it was real and enduring, tested by time and circumstance and emerging stronger from every trial. "What do you suppose happened to Hartwell Manor?" Evelyn wondered idly. "I have not thought of it in years." "Lady Pemberton sold it some time ago," Theodore replied. "The fortune from Lucinda's marriage was not sufficient to maintain it, and there were debts. I believe she now lives quietly in Bath with a small household. By all accounts, she is not unhappy." "I am glad," Evelyn said sincerely. "I do not wish ill on anyone, not even those who wronged me. Life is too short and too precious for such bitterness." "Another lesson for our children," Theodore observed. "Forgiveness and grace, even when neither is strictly deserved. You have taught them well, my love." As the evening drew to a close and they made their way back to the house, arm in arm as they had walked 1,000 times before, Evelyn reflected on the extraordinary journey her life had taken. From invisible servitude to honored duchess, from despair to profound joy, from isolation to the warm embrace of family and love. It seemed impossible that one chance encounter could lead to such transformation, yet here she stood, living proof that miracles could occur even in the most ordinary of moments. The forgotten niece had become the cherished duchess, the bastard child had become the beloved wife and mother. The shadow in the corner had stepped fully into the light and claimed her place in the world. And all because a duke had lost his way in a manor's corridors and found himself in a kitchen at midnight, where a young woman with sad eyes had offered him water and, unknowingly, captured his heart forever. Their love story would be told and retold through the generations of Hawthorns who followed, becoming family legend. The portrait in the gallery would be preserved and treasured, a reminder of where they had begun and what they had built together. And long after they had both passed from this world, the legacy of their unlikely union would endure. In the lives they had touched, the changes they had championed, the children and grandchildren who carried forward their values of compassion, courage, and the transformative power of love. For in the end, that was the true fairy tale. Not that a duke had married beneath his station, but that two people had recognized each other across the artificial barriers of society and had chosen love over convention, connection over calculation, hope over fear. They had proven that worth was not determined by birth or circumstance, that every person possessed inherent dignity and value waiting to be acknowledged and honored. And they had lived happily ever after, not because their life was perfect or free from challenge, but because they had faced every difficulty together, their love a constant anchor in an ever-changing world. That ultimately was the greatest gift they had given each other, the assurance that whatever might come, they would never again face it alone. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and together we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude, Echoes of Romance, the end.